Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's My Smart Garden session on preserving with myself, Kat Lavers. I want to start by acknowledging the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nations on whose lands we run this program in Hobsons Bay, but we also run the program in many other councils as well. And so I acknowledge that the people of the Greater Kulin Nations and their elders past and present. If you have discovered us on the internet somewhere, this is part of a program called My Smart Garden. We are a program that helps you grow food at home, grow habitat for wildlife, shelter your home from extreme weather events like heat waves, and also save water and reduce waste, and do many, many other good things in your gardens. It doesn't matter if you're in a small balcony rental place or whether you've got a traditional, larger suburban backyard. We'd really love to help you make it a more beautiful and functional space. So we do these sorts of events year round, and you can find out all about them on our website, mysmartgarden.org.au. Tiny bit about me, I'm a home food grower and a small space food production specialist. So normally when I run classes, I'm talking about how to grow your food. But of course, when you grow your food and you're successful, you have to deal with lots of produce. And so I'm also a big home preserver. And tonight, I'm going to take you through a session using the most common methods that I and many others use at home to deal with their home produce. But of course, you can use it on whatever's seasonal and fresh and cheaply available in markets as well. So I've got a couple of goals for tonight. One of them is I'd like you to be aware but not put off by some of the really important safety considerations that we have when preserving food at home. I'd also like you to be able to feel confident to just start the three methods that I'm going to go through in lots of detail. And these are two types of bottling, drying produce, and also lacto fermentation. And we can talk a little bit about jams and other techniques like freezing as well at the end. And then I'd also like you to have some resources that you can go to for further learning, because of course tonight will only be an introduction. But I just want to let you know as well that we will be, and we are recording this session. So hello to everyone watching in the future, and it will be going on the My Smart Garden website. So you'll be able to refer back to it, particularly some of the videos if you need to, while you're actually in the kitchen doing the preserving, hopefully in the future. So I really hope that that sounds good to you. Tonight, if you've got questions, I've got the chat window open and I'm going to do my best to follow it while I'm presenting. So if there's something that's on topic that you need to ask about what we're doing, please do feel free to put it in the chat. If it's not quite on topic, then we'll have some time at the end where we can answer more general questions. So that's my little intro, and I hope that sounds good to you. I'm going to now flick over to some slides and get started. Okay, so preserving. The first thing I wanted to talk to you about is why we preserve and when not to preserve. And I had some hard-won lessons of the reasons why we might not want to do this, despite obviously it being an exciting and fun thing to do. One of the reasons that we do it is to make the most of our harvest or of seasonal produce that's available in the market. And we can, of course, reduce waste and increase our resilience by having a supply of produce at home. We know that climate change is creating more disruptions to our food supplies. And, you know, just occasionally we have these events where there's limited availability, and it's really wonderful to have things at home instead. A big one for me is that I know exactly what's in the food that I've preserved. And in many cases, that means I can avoid unnecessary additives. Often that means a lot of sugar that ends up in commercial products. I also just love the convenience of preparing food in one go that can then last us for at least a year. So, you know, having all my stewed fruit ready for winter, having all our passata and tomato sauces sitting there on the shelf is something that we really love. And some of these things make beautiful, very thoughtful, sustainable gifts for people around you. However, preserving, just to say it up front, it takes effort, it takes energy and equipment, and you need some space in the calendar as well, let's be honest. So the thing that I've learned and I really want to emphasize is if you can, design your garden to pick fresh fruit all year round. And it's actually quite possible in our climate in Melbourne. If you flange your fruit trees carefully, you can have something ripening every single month of the year. And that really minimizes the amount of preserving that you will want to do. And it just means maybe doing a little bit so you've got some more diversity of fruit in the middle of winter, for example. Preserve only what you love. So when I started doing these sorts of things, occasionally you end up with a huge surplus of something, maybe, some roadside fruit or a real bargain at the market, or, something that you'd grown a lot of but you weren't using very much fresh. And unfortunately, preserving it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll use more of it. Sometimes it can just sit on the shelf. So if you're not really excited about eating it, then maybe don't worry about preserving it and just find other ways to distribute and share it. And also choose simple, low-tech methods to reduce costs and impact. There are a great many ways to preserve food. Some of them are not sustainable at all. So we're going to try and focus on the simplest, lowest tech methods tonight. If you decide not to preserve, then, as my friend Joel likes to say, we store our surplus in our friends. So, find people, find your friends, neighbours, family, but also think about local food banks, many of which do accept fresh garden produce, and that will make sure food gets to people who really need it. Okay, now to get into some of the detail, the first thing I want to talk to you about is how does preservation happen? And I have a little challenge for you. Feel free to play along at home. This is a bottle of barbecue sauce that I bought at a fundraiser at Altona Meadows Primary School some time ago, old photos. And I'd like you to have a look at the photo and have a look at the ingredients and tell me what has made this preserve stable enough to sit on a shelf for a year. I'm going to allow a pause and hope that people might be brave enough to pop something in the chat. And there's a lot of guesses coming through. Yeah, so we've got things like sugar, salt, vinegar, those sorts of things. Okay, so those things will make this product relatively stable. And let's have a look at some of the preserving agents now, one by one. Salt, as we know, preserving agent, and a very old method of preserving food, in fact, is to salt it, particularly things like meats and so forth. So salt helps to dry out food, but also creates conditions that are just not suitable for microbes to grow in. So salt is a preserving agent. Sugar is a preserving agent as well, as we know from things like jams. I'm going to come back to that. Acid. So that could be things like, commonly vinegar in preserving, but also very acidic things like lemon juice could count in here. Low air. So if we remove air from a product, essentially vacuum seal it, that prevents the growth of organisms. So low air is a form of preserving technique. Low water, often linked to salt. This is dehydrating food. So we reduce the moisture content low enough that we can't have any microbial growth. And also temperature. So temperature, of course, if we go very low, we can freeze food, and we know that that prevents microbial growth. If we go very high, then we can actually create a vacuum seal by then having a special lid that this bottle has, that as the contents cool down will contract, as things kind of contract when they cool, and then that will seal the bottle up and prevent microbial growth. So I'm just scrolling to the list. Yeah, vinegar, sugar, acid are the main things in here people are pointing out. And so those sorts of things keep your tomato sauce relatively okay on a shelf out of the fridge, and probably would do the same for this barbecue sauce. But what I want to emphasize here is that after a while, it doesn't work as well, and maybe you get a little bit of mold around the top or something like that. What is actually making this really stable for 12 months or more is the vacuum seal on this bottle, and we're going to talk about that as a technique tonight. And really the point of this slide is that I really, really want to make sure that you identify the preserving agent and make sure that there's enough of it in your preserve to do the job. So for example, if we just have a little bit of salt as an ingredient, and here it's almost last on the list, that is not actually preserving. So that's an ingredient, but it's not functioning as a preserving agent. Sugar. For something to be preserved in using sugar, it needs to have such a high concentration that it's like a jam. And so, yeah, and also with honey, for example, if honey is not properly reduced by the bees fanning it with their wings in the hive, then it ferments into mead. So think about jam and honey as the kind of thresholds where sugar starts to function well as a preserving agent. And if it's not at that concentration, then it ferments, and it's actually a fermenting agent instead. So this will be particularly important as we go through, that it's a very common thing to not quite understand exactly what's doing the preserving. So let's just remember that small amounts of these things don't necessarily do the job. And we'll talk about how to make sure we always get over that threshold when we're doing our preserving for safety. All right, so the first lot of techniques I'm going to talk about tonight is bottling. Here's a shot of my pantry when it's been cleaned and organised, showing you lots of different ways that I do preserving, different sorts of styles and so on. Bottling requires bottles, and so another play along at home question, which type of bottles do we do preserving in? We can actually reuse commercial products and use their sorts of systems. Some of them work at home and some of them don't. So any ideas? Yeah, so people are saying glass works. Basically, it's all of the top row and none of the bottom row. So while the bottom row has got some glass in it, the lids in the bottom row, we can't reuse them for the techniques that I'm about to show you in a home environment. They need to be processed through a factory. Okay, so the top row are the types of bottles to collect and jars as well. All right, now for bottling, there are some very important safety precautions. So I'm going to talk you through these in some detail because I really, really want to make sure that we're across them. There are many types of spoilage organisms, and using the correct preserving method is going to prevent them. The one that I worry most about is botulism. It's a very rare toxin, but it is deadly. It has no taste or smell or visual indicators. So the way that we're going to be safe is by knowing that we've followed the correct method and used the correct produce. It's super rare, but in countries and in times where there's a lot of home food preserving going on, occasionally people will get caught out. So it's not just a theoretical risk, it really is one that we want to be quite aware of. Now, botulism grows in environments that are low in oxygen. So that includes bottled preserves that we're talking about here. And it also includes produce under oil. So that's important, although we won't cover it tonight. Anything you put under a layer of oil is inherently then low in oxygen because the oil will seal it off. Okay. And then the other thing that botulism needs is a low acid environment. Okay. And it's not destroyed by boiling either, which is a bit of a misconception. So to stay very safe, we're going to only use foods that have enough acid, either natural acid in the food or added acid that we are contributing ourselves when using these low oxygen preserving methods, the bottling techniques. I'd also recommend that you use a modern recipe from a reliable source and don't vary the quantities of acidic ingredients like lemon juice, citric acid or vinegar. That's because these recipes have been tested to make sure that they meet a threshold of pH that we'll look at in a minute. And that's what means that we won't get botulism forming in that bottle over time. Use other methods like freezing, drying or pressure canning for very low acid fruits and vegetables. We're not going to cover pressure canning tonight, but this is something that you can do if anyone out there is interested in having bottled vegetables or meats. Pressure canning uses special equipment and it's basically a pressure cooker that does this process. So it is able to use pressure to really sterilize it to a higher degree. Okay, but that is special equipment and not a technique we'll cover. And to be quite honest, I use other methods like freezing and drying to deal with vegetables and meats if I need to preserve those. I'm just going back to the under oil. If you were going to put something under oil, it's safe if it's dried and you've got it, say, in some kind of condition where there's no moisture for microbes to grow on. If it's not dried, then it does need something acidifying to make it safe. And I mention this because there have been botulism cases in things like basil or garlic under oil. So that's really worth knowing about if you're going to follow those sorts of techniques. Okay, so the other critical piece of information for botulism safety is knowing the pH threshold, which is 4.6. So thinking back to science class, if you did this in school, we've got a pH spectrum, things that are acid and then things that are alkaline. Neutral is about 7 in the middle. So things that are in the acid end get lower numbers, and pH 4.6 is the cutoff where we know if we're below that, botulism cannot grow. So on the screen, you can see some fruits that are high in acid. So these sorts of fruits on the left-hand side here don't require any special consideration. You can go ahead and use these bottling methods straight away with those. Unfortunately, there are fruits on the right-hand side that are low in acid. These ones, we should add a little bit of acid just to be safe. And probably there's a few people at home surprised that tomatoes are on this list. And yes, it was a surprise for me too. But they are, our food scientists tell us they are now being tested, and there are some that fall just above that threshold, unfortunately. And people always ask, how have Italian and Greek communities gotten away with it for so long? And look, it's possible that the varieties or the climate that they're growing in brings it under that threshold. Possible that they're being boiled for quite a long time and that concentrates the acid and reduces it under the threshold. So I just want to let everyone know that it can be a little bit higher. It's hard to unlearn this information when you've received it. So for safe preserving, always add about 2 tablespoons of lemon juice or about half a teaspoon of citric acid per litre. Citric acid is very cheap, especially from the preserving shops that I'm going to show you at the end. So it's not hard to have that on hand and just to pop a tiny bit in each of your jars first. And there is another category that I wanted to show you here, and these are very low acid fruits. And so this is the figs, melons, mangoes, bananas also fall in here, lots of tropical fruits. And I will be able to share a PDF that's got a more complete list of fruits with people who are joining live, or you can easily search for that online as well. So those sorts of very low acid fruits are really best preserved using other methods, unless you're going to add a lot of acidic ingredients like vinegar and sort of have figs in a acidic brine, and then you could bottle them. There's a question from Gina in the chat. Thanks, Gina. What acid point is required for fig jam? Okay, so jam would be a little bit different because we've got sugar as a preserving agent in there. And generally people aren't vacuum sealing it, which is what we're going to talk about with this technique. So in that case, it's kind of open and it's not in a low oxygen environment. If you were going to bottle it, then I would say maybe just check for an approved recipe, and that will make sure that it does have a threshold. With jam, it's tricky because you are reducing it so much that you concentrate natural acids. So it's going to be a little bit more acidic than a fresh fig, for example. So I couldn't give you that information up front, Gina, but just have a look for an approved recipe for that one. I will send you the PDF, Clarelle. So yeah, I'll email it to everyone who's registered. Now, which of these lids are suitable for bottling? You have very good look. And yeah, so definitely none of the ones on the bottom. So we can see there's some rust in the bottom left, definitely a huge dent in that critical rim in the middle, and there's definitely wear and tear on the right-hand side. The one at the top left, that's looking okay to me. It's got a tiny little tip on the outside of the rim there. That's probably fine. The one on the right-hand side here, we can see it's starting to get worn. And typically I find we get about 3 uses out of these sorts of lids, and then they have to be replaced, unfortunately. The glass can go on forever as long as you treat it gently and don't chip or crack it. But yeah, these lids you will have to replace, and I'll show you some sources for where we can get lids locally at the end of the session. Okay. All right, I've got a couple more general safety precautions and then we'll move on to the techniques that you're keen to hear about. Firstly, I've just got to say it, make sure your bottles and jars are clean and in perfect condition. Do a check for cracks and chips, particularly in the base of your jars, and replace dented, damaged and worn lids and any rubber seals as needed. If you have some of the classic Aussie Fowler's preserving kit, that's where I'm talking about rubber seals, or maybe you've got some mason jars and they've got a separate seal as well that you can replace. Preserves are a really good way to use second grade fruit that's imperfect, but if you do have any that's actually moldy or rotten, I would not personally preserve it using bottling. Yeah, there have been some studies into that, and yeah, they have found that you can introduce some organisms that make it at higher risk of spoilage. So just save those for some freshly made stewed fruit, and just keep the imperfect shapes and sizes and things for your bottling. When we're bottling, we need to heat our bottles or the preserving mix to the right temperature for the right time. This is critical to make sure everything gets heated the right amount to prevent spoilage. And I need to note that if you ever practice this at a very high altitude, if you decide to go and live on a mountain somewhere and have an apple orchard, then high altitudes require special adjustments because water boils at a lower temperature when we increase the height above sea level. So you will actually need to go and look up a book and it will tell you the right amount of time to be boiling for. Yes, sudden temperature changes will break glass. It's not a news flash, but just a reminder. So if you've got cold fruit, it goes into cold bottles and they go into cold water, or they can, to be honest, they can be warm, but we don't want a big temperature difference. Hot fruit goes into hot bottles, which go into hot water. And when we pack our bottles, as you'll see in a minute, we do that carefully with tea towels or cardboard so they don't knock together. And when you remove hot bottles from the preserving vat, you need to place them on an insulated surface. So not a cold stone or stainless steel bench top. Ask me how I know. You need something like a wooden chopping board or a towel that's going to insulate it from a change in temperature. Otherwise, the base of the bottles is liable to crack. Okay, I can see a few questions. We might come back to those at the end because we're needing to move on. Be careful around hot ovens, glass and liquids. I'm extremely recommending of jar lifters that I'll show you. And finally, if you do preserve and then you discover you've got any kind of mold, a bulging lid, any rising bubbles in the contents that you can see, or any kind of off smell, don't taste it. Discard it, check the bottle for any cracks, chips, damage, and also check your method and make sure that you really were following the techniques. The reason why I say don't taste it is that we know now from food science that mold can actually raise the pH. So we can have like a problem that then causes a change in pH, which then could increase the risk of botulism as a secondary issue in there. So it's important not to taste it and just to make sure that nothing else, no pets or no kids or anything like that get into it. Just discard it and start again. Okay, so now through the safety advice, we're going to get on to the methods. And what I thought I'd do is just give you an overview in this written description, and then I'll show you each of these steps with some videos for clarity. So in the first method, we're going to talk about cold pack bottling. This is where cold, fresh fruit, cooled stew fruit or juice is packed into unsterilised cold jars or bottles and capped with unsterilised lids. They are clean though. Jars are placed into a room temperature water bath that is brought up to temperature. When at a gentle boil, a timer is started for a prescribed time so that the jars and the contents are sterilised together. Jars are then removed and placed on an insulated surface. As the jars cool, the contents contract to form a vacuum seal. Okay, so that's our overview. Let's have a look at how this actually happens. There's an equipment list here for you. And the first thing you'll see is my very beautiful, shiny stainless steel preserving vat here. I was extremely fortunate to have some friends that found this in an op shop for $50 and sent me a quick text and said, would you like it? And yes, they are very expensive. So I feel very lucky to have it, and it's convenient. But for most people, all you really need is a big stock pot like the one that you see on the right-hand side. That's very multifunctional. You can use it for lots of other things in the kitchen. It does need to be quite a big stock pot because you need clearance below and also above your jars. So just have a look at the diagram there. We'd like to have, about 1.5 centimetres of space below the rack. So you get a little cake rack and you pop that in the bottom, and that gives you some clearance. And then we want at least 2.5 to 5 centimetres of water covering the jars at the top, and the same again as airspace, because when you bring this up to temperature, the surface is going to be rolling a little bit, and we don't want any hot water splashing out. This is a little bit different to many preserving books that you will find, old ones and also new ones that are not up to date with the latest research. Many of them will say it's okay to have liquid about maybe 3/4 of the way up the jars. But again, the latest research is telling us that doesn't guarantee that everything in the jar is heated to the right degree for safety. So I do recommend people follow this. And that adds up to quite a deep pot, depending on the size jars that you are planning to use. But really, there's nothing special to it, just a large stock pot and a cake rack in the bottom. And then this is my preferred type of jar lifter that you can see in the image here. I'll show you another video that's got my old ones, and they're not very good. So if you do decide to buy a jar lifter, get this type that you can see in the image here. Okay, some other equipment for you there. We want a clean damp cloth, lots of tea towels or cardboard for packing. You'll need a timer, ideally jar lifters, wooden chopping board or a towel to put those preserves on, and of course, labels. Karen's just said, my jar lifter doesn't have the rubber and doesn't work. And yes, Karen, that was the first jar lifter that I owned as well, and not recommended at all, very unsafe. Okay, so let's go through these steps together. The first one is we're going to inspect and clean all of our jars and bottles and lids. And when I say clean, I mean hot soapy water, and that's all we need for this method. We're going to prepare the produce and a preserving liquid as well, which can be water. It can be a sugar syrup if you do want sugar in there, which does actually improve the colour and the texture if it's going to sit for a long time. And then we're going to do some packing. So let me show you my video. Hope that's working for you. So here I've got apples that I've sliced, and they're just sitting in some water that has a bit of lemon juice in there. And that is just to stop them from going brown, which is an aesthetic thing. There's no safety risk if they do, but brown apples are not as appealing. So I've just got them sitting in there while I prepared them. And you can see I'm packing them quite tightly into the jar, but not all the way to the top. And that's because the contents are going to expand a little bit when they get hot. And we definitely don't want anything to push out under the lid, because then the lid will get dirty and it may not seal properly. So I'm going to stop about 1.5 meters from the top, centimeters, from the top. And that's what we call the head space. Okay, so that's where we're allowing room for expansion there with these cold materials. Okay, If you did get anything on the rim, of course, wipe it with a clean damp cloth and then screw the lid on finger tight. Doesn't need to be extreme, just pop it on nice and tight. Ash has got a question in the chat. Is it possible to heat the jars and the contents for longer to sterilise if the pot is not deep enough? I wouldn't do it, Ash, just because it's diverting from the method that we know is safe. I think just we want to have those basics right. There are different timings for smaller jars to larger jars. As you'll see, I tend to use a blanket timing for all of them, but if you wanted to have a shorter preserving time, you could actually look up in a preserving reference book the time for your jar size. And Jess has asked, what do you fill the jar with? Plain water. Yes, in my case, just plain water, which I use because it's healthier than having a sugary liquid. The old preserving books always talk about adding sugar syrups, either light ones or heavy ones with a lot more sugar. And as I said, that does actually preserve the texture and the colour quite well. But I find water totally adequate. We're not trying to store them for, very, very long time. And it's healthy and it's safe. So you're absolutely safe doing this with plain water. And just make sure you really pack the fruit in there so there isn't much water in the jar. It's mostly apple. All right, so now we're going to pack these jars into our sterilizer. That's the technical term for our stock pot with a cake rack in the bottom. And we're going to use tea towels, or you can use cardboard as well to separate them and avoid breakage. We fill up the sterilizer with cold, or you can use slightly warm water if you want to. And remember, we're trying to get about 5 centimetres over the top of the lids, or at least 1 inch, so 2.5 if you have a shorter pot. Then we turn on the heat and we bring it all up to a very gentle simmer or gentle boil. And that's the image that you can see there. I just want you to sort of get the amount of bubbles that we have on the surface. So when it's at that point, we start a timer and then we process it for 45 minutes. As I said, if you're using small jars, you could look up a preserving reference book and you might find a slightly shorter time in there, which can be good if you're doing mostly small jars. Okay, so that's the sort of visual cue for we're at the right temperature. The most important thing here is that you only start the timer once it's at that point, okay? So not when you turn on the heat, but when it's at that point. So food scientists recommend that these jars are held at 100 degrees Celsius for around 25 minutes and checking those times in a technical reference book. But I and most other people I know who actually do this all the time use a blanket rule of about 45 minutes just below 100 degrees Celsius. And the reason for that is safety, because it actually gets very violent inside the pot if it's at 100 degrees Celsius. So we go quite a lot longer at a very slightly lower temperature, which we know does work for safety. But yeah, 100 degrees introduces other safety concerns as well. And Ben's asking, what do you mean by processing for 45 minutes? Oh, thanks, Ben. That's just literally leaving it in the pot for 45 minutes before we start to take them out. So process is just sitting in the boiling water bath, as it's called. Okay, I don't have a video for this one, sorry, but the last step here, once that period has passed, is we remove them using our jar lifter, or for safety, if you prefer, you could leave them to cool in the pot. So for example, overnight. And then you can set them on a wooden board or a tea towel, as I've said, so that they don't crack with an extreme temperature change on your bench. And key point here, avoid disturbing those lids. So be very careful when you're taking them out. Try and grab the jar itself, not the actual lid, because the seal won't have set yet. Okay, so as it cools down, that's when it gets tight and sealed, but there'll still be a fairly soft seal at this point. That's normal. So yeah, try not to touch those lids. Definitely don't poke at them. Just leave them be. And I would monitor them for about 2 days to check the seals. Occasionally there'll be one maybe that hasn't properly worked. There might have been some kind of a dent that you didn't see or something like that. And I would really rather find out about that now rather than after 6 months in the pantry when it could create a lot bigger issue. So I tend to leave them out on the kitchen table for 2 days or so before I label them and put them away. Okay, let's go back for some questions here. How would you maintain at least 95 degrees? Do you use a thermometer? You absolutely could, especially if you really want to make sure you've got a kitchen thermometer, you can put it in there. Don't really need a thermometer. It's just below that rolling boil is the range that I'm talking about here. So get it up to very high temperature and turn it up as high as you can without the bubbles getting quite violent and knocking the jars together. Okay, so just a fraction below there, and you can do without a thermometer in that case. Gina says, I know fruit is not always 100% clean. I have apples with blemishes and fly bites or bruises. Can you still use the good side of an apple or any other fruit the same way? Yeah, look, it's one where probably the food scientists wouldn't like it, but in reality, as long as it's the whole side is perfect, then I would probably cut those bruises off and put them in the compost and still do it. But yeah, that's just telling you what the scientists would say about that as well. From Georgia, how long can you take between prepping the jars and sterilising? Does it need to be done the same day, or can you leave in the fridge overnight before sterilising? Yeah, so for this method, as long as those jars are clean, you pack them with the fruit, they could sit there overnight in the fridge, no worries, because the sterilising is sterilising the jars and the contents together. So that's for this method. For the next method we'll look at, you need to do it all very quickly. Okay, so try and do it all on the same day, but for this method, you would be fine if you had to pause in between packing and sterilising. How do you know your seal is perfect after 48 hours? Sorry, that's a good question. So some of you will remember pop-top lids, and they have a little pop in the centre and it contracts down when it's properly sealed. That was very helpful, by the way. I wish that we could still get those lids, but they're not really easy to find anymore, especially as replacements. But in a kind of similar way, if you look closely, and you do have to get your eye in, but you will be able to eventually see the difference between a lid that has contracted and held down and one that has not. And maybe you could take a jar that's not preserved and compare it to the ones that you have preserved, and you will see it's subtle, but there is a difference in that way. Sometimes, the lid will be loose. Sometimes if you left it for 48 hours, you might see some bubbles rising up in the produce as the food starts to ferment. So those sorts of things will give you a bit of a tip. Sometimes the lid is just a bit loose, so it's obvious that it hasn't worked. So there's some tips that I hope that helped. Jeff says it's like poaching eggs. Yes, it is, I guess. I've seen a jar sealing where the jar is upside down. Does it matter which way the jar is? No. But for the second method I'm about to show you, that's where people sometimes do turn them upside down. So just hold on to that thought, Ash. Really great comments and questions. Let's have a look at that second method now, because there's always a bit of confusion between hot pack and cold pack bottling. Okay, so method 2, hot pack bottling. This one, stewed fruit or juice is at a gentle boil on the stovetop. Jars or bottles are sterilised in a hot oven. Lids are sterilised in boiling water. The hot fruit is quickly ladled into hot sterilised jars and capped with a hot sterilised lid. As the jar cools, the contents contract to form a vacuum seal. Okay, and that's the method I've used for this delicious elderberry syrup from Dalesford that you can see on the right-hand side. So another bit of a note in here, this method is also known as the open kettle method. I think it's important to know some of these terms, because if you're researching things on the internet, it's helpful to know what you're looking at. The National Centre for Home Food Preservation, which is a US-based university-centred institute, they don't recommend this method anymore because there is a small risk of spoilage because there's a gap between the sterilised jars and the produce. So you have to kind of combine them all together, and they are exposed to air very briefly. So for this reason, I do try and use the cold pack method where possible. And if you are doing this, they suggest you do an extra step of a short boiling water bath, which is what we've just covered as an extra step. But in practice, this method is still in widespread use. I do use it myself at home for things that might suffer if they get boiled for a long time. So where you want, for example, your dill cucumbers or something to stay a little bit crisp. They won't be crisp after putting them in a boiling water bath for 45 minutes. So that's where this method can sometimes be helpful. Or if your stewed fruit is already hot and you don't want to cool it down and then, wait for the other process to be able to be used. But yeah, I do like to tell people what science says about these methods. If you're using very acidic produce, then the risk of botulism is very, very low. But yeah, just to note that from the National Centre for Home Food Preservation. So for this one, we need this sort of equipment. The only thing that's really special in there is that you might find it helpful to have a wide mouth funnel, which you can see on the right-hand side. This is helpful because you need to do this method quite quickly and you need to try and keep everything as clean as possible. And so trying to fill up jars and not get the produce all over the rim of them is tricky, and that's where the wide mouth funnel is so useful. The wide mouth allows you to have chunky fruit and things like that going in, not getting stuck in a slim funnel tube. So if you were going to do a lot of this method, then home food preserving equipment suppliers have this as a standard piece of equipment. All right, so let's look at these steps. And as with the other method, we inspect and clean all of our jars and bottles and lids. We place the glass in our oven and set it to about 150 degrees Celsius. But make sure we keep the lids separate and they go in a bowl on our bench top. Those lids will be damaged if we put them in the oven at 150 degrees. So we need to treat them a little bit more gently with boiling water. And then we'll prepare our fruit or whatever we're preserving up to a high simmer or a very gentle boil on the stovetop. And again, I've got this video, it's quite a short one. And that just shows you the point I'm talking about here. Okay, so it's plopping around. It's got lots of steam. It's got bubbles all over the surface. So it doesn't have to be a vigorous rolling boil, but it does have to be very hot, just below that point. Okay, so when the jars and the bottles and the produce are at the right temperatures, lay out your equipment and then pour boiling water through your funnel and maybe your ladle over the lids to cover them. So that's their sterilisation, if you like, as well. All right. Now, this is the key part. At this point, we have to work really quickly because the longer gap there is between taking a jar out of the oven and filling it and getting the lid on, the more opportunity for microbes to get into that process. So once you start this, you keep going. You definitely don't answer a text message or a phone call or, go and do anything else. So it requires a little bit of focus. It does require you to work quickly with hot glass. And so I note that as a safety risk. And again, if that worries you, then I'd encourage you to use the cold pack method instead. So let's do it. I've just taken a jar with my not very good jar lifters out of the oven and I'm getting my fruit ready. And now this is an extra step. I'm just checking the temperature of the jar in there. And when I put that little teaspoon of fruit in, there was a real rapid sizzle. I heard it. And yet the fruit, was clearly quite a different temperature to the jar. So all ovens are a little bit different. And what this means is that those jars are just slightly too hot. And again, we've got to be really careful with temperature differences in the produce and the glass, or we could actually crack the glass with the produce. So what this means, if you get an extremely rapid sizzle, is we just want to wait a little bit longer or maybe turn the oven temperature down just to equalize the temperatures a little bit. Okay, so the jar should be too hot to touch, But if we are getting a sizzle when we put the first drop of produce in there, just hold off a second or two and let that drop slightly in temperature before we proceed. And if we don't have a rapid sizzle, then we keep going as quickly as we can to fill the jar up, leaving a centimetre of headspace. In this case, the headspace isn't as important because everything is already hot. It's not going to expand anymore. It's actually just going to cool down. Okay, but don't go too close to the rim, because if we do get the rim dirty, then the seal won't work. Okay, so here's the whole process then, if we've made sure that the temperature difference is not too great. We're going to continue working quickly. We're going to take out no more than, say, 2 jars at a time from the oven. If we take out more than that, then they'll cool down too much before we get to them. Okay, so mostly they're staying in the oven waiting for us. Now I've got my wide mouth funnel. It's actually the hopper of a grain mill for those interested. And I've got my hot simmering apples in the pan, and I'm popping them in, just making sure I don't add too much, but also trying to get close to about a centimetre or so. Okay, so I've done one. If I have spilt anything on that rim, I'll wipe it, trying to wipe the outside of it only there. And then I grab one of my lids gently and pop it straight on. It's very hot. Chefs talk about having asbestos fingers. I guess you get used to that. But yeah, it is all very hot. And then I've popped them on the tray, ready to cool down. Okay, so that is the hot pack bottling. And then again, I would monitor these for 48 hours to check those seals, and then I'd label them and store them in a cool, dark place. So yeah, just to go back, Ash, when you might have seen people tipping a jar upside down, people often do it, and I do sometimes. You can tip the jar upside down and set it on the lid, and then it cools down upside down. And I guess the reason for that is you've got very, very hot fruit in there, and that can also help to make sure that that lid is sterilised as well. You shouldn't need to do that. If you need to do that for safety, then something's gone wrong. But that's why you might see some people doing it. And then Jolene's asking, is using borosilicate glass safer? The answer, I have no idea. I do not know what that is, Jolene. Sorry, I'm no use to you there. Maybe someone in the chat knows and would like to comment. Okay, so just a couple of other things here. My tomato preserves, just to show you the range of techniques. There's a salsa there, like a corn chip style salsa, that we can do cold or hot pack. Then the cherry tomatoes on the right-hand side. This is a wonderful technique that I learned from Maria Chiavarella, who's another presenter in My Smart Garden. And you just literally squash fresh cherry tomatoes into a jar and until the jar's full. And you can tip out some of the juice if you want to, just to get more flesh in there. But you do that, and then you do the cold pack method with those. And that's a delicious way of preserving cherry tomatoes for use in the winter. I have also made super with tomato sauce using some of these recycled beer bottles, as you see on the far left-hand side. I don't really understand it, but they don't seem to explode, even though you put a seal on them with a beer cap press. My tomato sauce, I probably don't have time to go into it now, but I make what we call a rogue passata, because it definitely doesn't follow any traditional Italian method. But we include all the skin and the seeds in there and have absolutely no problems with them. And yeah, that makes a nice kind of wholemeal tomato sauce, if you like, with all the nutrition of the skin and seeds in there. And I also do some whole tomatoes in passata that you can see in the middle. And sometimes we make actual tomato sauce as well. I did want to show you in the ketchup photo just the difference of having these things sitting on the shelf for a bit too long. So this is I've taken this photo a long time ago, but at the time it was maybe about 2 years old, the cherry tomato and chili sauce that you can see in the foreground. And then you can see a freshly made tomato ketchup in the background there. So just note, while they're still safe to eat, the Colour does change over time. It, gets duller. And there will be some difference in flavour as well. And that's not a safety thing. It's just the enzymes that are still present do degrade produce if it sits there for too long. So we generally try and get through our produce in 12 months, 18 months or so. Anything that looks like it might sit for longer, we distribute as quickly as we can to other people, just to make sure that we're always eating quality stuff, which is what we want. And we usually have to make room for new produce as well. Jeff said, I've seen people wiping the inside of the lid with vinegar. What do you think? It shouldn't be necessary, Jeff. There's a wide range of techniques that people use out there, but nothing I've seen says that that's a necessary process. So, and also just by wiping, you might be introducing something as well, unfortunately. So, yeah, probably just try and keep it really simple, get it straight out of the boiling water and onto the steaming hot jar. Okay. So I'm going to move on now to drying, which is the next of our category of techniques. So I hope that's given you just an overview of the two main methods that you'll see for bottling. And you might have already made a decision around which one you want to use, or maybe you'll use both at times. Now, for drying, here's some examples to show you what we do at home. You can make the most luxurious fruit salad mixes when you dry your own produce. And you can do some special things like fruit leathers as well, which I'm also going to talk about. So for drying, we'll talk about actually how to dry them in a minute, but the first thing that you need to do is usually do some slicing of the produce. What we're trying to do here is remove moisture as quickly as possible to the point where mold can no longer survive. And I absolutely love drying because the volume and the weight are radically reduced, and it has a really long shelf life as well. It's also highly portable, which is great for people who like bushwalking, like myself. So yeah, drying is a real winner. And of course, you can rehydrate them if you want to make something similar to a stewed fruit at a later point if you need. Now, some tips here. The temperatures where we can get food to dry range from about 40 degrees to 70 degrees Celsius, and you need really good airflow. For things which are more prone to spoilage, you would bump it up to the higher end. So go for 70. For things that are very delicate, like herbs, for example, in your garden, you could use the lower 40 degrees, and that might preserve a little bit more of their flavour in there. So yeah, fruits, I'm usually looking at least maybe 50 to 70 degrees Celsius wherever possible. The fruit I find is best if you slice it into slices that are about 1/2 centimetre or 5 millimetres thick or less. And the evenness of the slices really does matter. So the very top photos there, you can see an even slice on the left and a wedge shape on the right. And the wedge shapes, you'll find that, yeah, that fat end of the wedge takes a lot longer and sometimes is prone to spoilage along the way. So try and keep them as even as you possibly can. Dried foods can be sealed tightly and then frozen for 2 days before you stash them in the pantry. And that will actually kill any insect eggs. So if you do some of the solar drying techniques that I'll show you, you may find that insects do get in there. It's honestly quite normal, even in some commercial processing of dried goods. It's done out in the open, solar dried. So this is a step where the eggs will be deactivated before they turn into anything disgusting. And you can also use this for seeds, by the way, as gardeners. So the key thing is you put them in a very, very tight package, like a Ziploc bag is good. And make sure when you take them out after 2 days from the freezer that the whole package is back at room temperature before you open it. Otherwise, your cold dried fruit will attract moisture and that will rehydrate it. And it's kind of, undoing all of your hard work, shall we say. Okay, so that's a good trick just if you have done any outdoor drying. Then when you actually store your dried fruit, make sure it's in airtight containers because our air is humid. There's moisture in it, and you will find your dried food does reabsorb it and it becomes sticky and not particularly palatable. So lots of small airtight containers are better than one giant container if you've got a lot of dried produce. We're just trying to make sure that it's got a good tight lid on it. So a question from Regina, what of using sunlight for herb drying? Are there any issues? Technically it will work, Regina, but herbs actually dry beautifully indoors in the shade at room temperature. And that will definitely preserve more of the essential oils in them that are the reason that we're often drying them. So I actually recommend that you just hang them up in bunches in your kitchen in the shade somewhere. That's what I do. Just looking at them because they're in my kitchen to my right. And they're good for about a year, I find, if you do that. The main problem actually I have with drying is just that the volume reduces by so much that it's easy to eat way too much. You can eat a lot more dried fruit than you would fresh. And sometimes it's hard to keep up with people's appetite for it in your household when it's so delicious. So you can see in the middle photos there a dehydrated tray that's fully packed, and on the right-hand side what the same tray turns out to be after dehydrating. So it's quite a big shift, and you need to be a bit mentally prepared for the reduction in volume. Down below there, that's some persimmon that I've been drying on a screen outside, and it's mostly worked, but just have a look and I'll circle it with my mouse. There is some mold that has appeared, and these are actually on bits where they had skin on the back. So it's like the edge of the persimmon, and that skin is a bit of a seal that prevented moisture from coming off on both sides. And so that's why those ones got a little bit of mold on them. So just be aware of that. Watch out for things like that. It's probably not harmful, but yeah, we'd probably prefer to remove those. Renee is saying, would the fruit contain the same level of fructose for those with an intolerance, i.e. not eating too much? I'm not a nutritionist, Renee, so I'm unwilling to make proclamations of that. And again, if someone in the chat does have training, let us know. Yeah, I don't know what happens to fructose during drying, if it's transformed in some way. So yeah, not sure. That's one you'll have to ask someone with training in that area. All right, so let's have a look at some drying methods. Okay, firstly, most obvious one, yes, you can go and buy a food dehydrator. I do have one of these because some crops come in at a time where the other methods are a little bit tricky. They are convenient, but they do use a bit of power, and you'd probably expect to have them on for at least 24 hours unless you're drying something very light like herbs. Yeah, maybe up to 2 days in some cases for very moisture-rich produce. If you don't want to buy a special piece of equipment, which I totally support if you're an occasional food dryer only, then you can use your oven. And if you've got an old leaky oven, you can probably just use it as is. I'm very lucky to have a more modern oven that seals really well. And so when I dry food in it, I have to actually prop it open with a wooden spoon there. Otherwise, the moisture just becomes steam and it doesn't actually dehydrate. But yeah, propped open and set at a temperature about 50, 60 degrees, as we were talking about before. This is a very effective dehydrator, particularly if you put your sliced fruit on a cake rack so that moisture can evaporate from both sides. It does the job, and there might not be any need for you to have any other type of drying electronic equipment. What I did want to talk to you about is actually drying food using sunlight, of which we have an awful lot of at this time of year, especially in February. And it might seem surprising, but you can actually dry food very successfully up on a corrugated iron roof. I don't know if you've ever been up on a corrugated iron roof on a sunny day. It is unpleasantly hot. It's an incredible microclimate. We have a lot of heat that is reflected off a metal roof like this. It's far too hot for ants and things to be walking around up there. And surprisingly, flies, birds, that sort of thing, don't seem particularly interested in my experience. So you can definitely give this a go. And of course, you could put some extra fly screen or insect mesh over the top if you wanted to as well. This is just a screen I knocked up with some timber framing and some shade cloth. My friend Joel, who I teach with, uses some bread crates, the plastic bread crates that sometimes bakeries get rid of, with some metal fly-wire mesh inside those, and they're kind of convenient because they've got handles as well. So yeah, this does work beautifully. You would need to remove them from the roof overnight when things cool down and then pop them back up the next day. And it does involve getting on a ladder for most of us. So that's a definite consideration. But yeah, this is how friends of mine who have orchards, outside of the city, this is how they do a lot of their fruit drying because the volumes they need to get through are huge. So you can experiment with this at home, see if you can get it to work for you. Yes, I can see the comment around birds. Surprisingly, has not been too much of an issue for those friends, but there's a lot of different birds out there, and they all have different learning. And I don't want to swear that all of them are not immune to this technique. Ash has talked about, what about hygiene, dust with drying in open air? Look, I mean, yes, if you're in a very polluted area, that would be a concern. We are all breathing it in every time we leave our house, Ash. So I guess it's a personal question of where we choose to draw the line. But yes, that might be something you want to consider as well. All right, and the last one I was going to show you tonight, it's not the best photo, sorry, but I was trying to just encapsulate my very small slow combustion wood heater and also my drying rack in this last photo. That drying rack is on a pulley system, so we can lower it up and down. And a lot of the year we dry our washing on it, but it actually also makes a great food dehydrator when combined with the screen that you can see on the roof. So we can actually take it off the roof and then bring it inside and stick it on there sometimes as well, although of course we don't use this fire during the warmer weather. So yeah, just have a look and see, you might have some very warm microclimates in your home that are suitable. And up in this pocket in the corner, it's 4 or 5 degrees warmer than the rest of the room. And it does, do quite a good job of drying food as well. Okay, so hopefully one of those suits you, that you can see in there. And yeah, I do think, just by the way, having a dehydrator as a community resource is a great idea. I know in the past some community centres have had them available for loan, and maybe some libraries would be interested in doing that if you've got a library of things like some libraries do these days. So yeah, think about it maybe as something that gets shared around the community, because we don't usually use them for more than a few days a year. Okay, so I'm moving on now to just something else that you can do if you want to make a special product at home. And this is fruit leathers. Now, some of you will be familiar with an old advertising campaign for a product that advertised itself to be real fruit flat out, maybe showing my age there. But I thought it might be fun to just have a look at the ingredients list for said fruit leather product. And it's in small font, so I'll read it for you if you're on a tiny screen. The first ingredient is maltodextrin, corn or wheat, and then it contains 24% concentrated fruit puree, but only 24%. And then after that, there's sugar, modified starch, sunflower oil, apple juice concentrate, emulsifier, flavour, food acid, vegetable gums, and some colours extracted from fruit, veggies, and plants. So, maybe it's not the worst list, but it's certainly not real fruit flat out. And I can tell you that for sure, because when you do get real fruit flat out, this is what it looks like. There's nothing like the roll-ups that you might have been familiar with from the shops. But these are really, really lovely. They're fun to make. They're fun to eat. Kids really like them. So if you wanted to do this at home, it's as simple as just stewing fruit with as little water as you can get away with and then pureeing it. Now, some fruits that are mostly water, like berries, you actually need to mix them with a fruit that's got some bulk, like an apple. So the berry ones that you can see there, that's berries that are flavoured a pureed apple, if you like. It wouldn't work if I tried to do it with solid berries. Then once you've got your puree, I line a tray with some parchment paper and then pour a 5mm layer of the puree across the tray and use a little spatula to spread it out nice and evenly. And then you dehydrate it, and I usually do this in my oven. And when the leather is firm enough that you can peel it away from the parchment paper, do that and then flip it over to finish drying off the base. And you can then cut it into strips or maybe some wild shapes with scissors, and then just label and store it in an airtight jar as you would any other dried fruit. So it's a lovely technique, really fun. I hope it inspires you to give it a go at home. Okay, so finishing off drying there, and again, just showing you some of our dried fruit at home and some of the fruit leathers that we make. And really encourage drying as just a great way to store your produce long term and in very space and weight efficient way. And I have talked about fruit here, but of course you can dry vegetables as well. So it's a good way to store those to avoid the dangerous low acid botulism issue that we've talked about below. All right, so I'm going to move on to my final technique. I know there are a few questions in the chat, but if it's okay, I will come back to those at the end. Oh, Joanne has asked, what are some of your fruit leather combinations? Let me see. I'm not sure if I can go back, but I do like, as I've said, berry and apple, and I also really like berry and feijoa. For people who know what feijoas are, feijoas, pineapple guavas, sometimes people call them, are really delicious. I actually prefer them when they're mixed in with apples, so I do a bit of a 50-50 blend of those. Straight apple is really nice. Yeah, pureed stone fruits work really well. So yeah, you can really go a bit wild with flavour ideas there, and people might like to put some of their own examples in the chat if you've made them before. Okay, so the last method I want to cover in detail tonight is one that we might use for vegetables. So we've talked a lot about fruit, but now I thought I'd give you one that we can do with vegetables. And this is lactofermentation. So we're actually talking about fermentation now for the first time. So we'll have a look at what that is. I've just noticed it's getting quite dark in here, so excuse me while I put a light on. There we go. Okay. So what is fermentation actually? It's a biochemical process in which carbohydrates like sugars or starch are converted by microbes like yeast and bacteria into things like alcohol, acid, and carbon dioxide. So, basic definition. Now, traditional diets all around the world almost always contain some form of fermented foods, interestingly. And I thought just for fun, I would show you when I was doing some work in Mongolia. This is my friend and interpreter, my colleague, Tilabek, and we were on our journey out to the site we were working at, and we stopped at the Mongolian equivalent of a lemonade stand where these young people are selling airag, or kumis, which is fermented mare's milk or horse milk. And it's actually pretty good, I have to say. As someone who really enjoys their kefir, it's quite a similar product. So they've used a culture in this case to preserve that mare's milk and turn it into something really delicious, a little bit fizzy actually, and fermented. Might actually not sound as good as it tasted in context. So anyway, all around the world, people have fermented foods. And we do this to maintain the safety of food at room temperature so we can extend the life of it and to reduce wastage as well. It also produces some really delicious flavours. So miso, which is essentially made, can be made from many things, but soybeans and salt are the basic products. We introduce microbes and we get miso. And there's nothing like homemade miso for the flavours. It's something else, one of the most delicious things I've ever tasted. I don't make any claims about these things, but many people say there are gut health benefits to having probiotic foods in your diet. And certainly medical research has really extended to understand the importance of our gut microbiome in the last decade or so. Again, we can avoid unnecessary additives. Pasteurization, which is actually often what you receive if you buy fermented products commercially. So sauerkraut that you buy that's on a shelf and not refrigerated, that's all been pasteurized. So the benefit of those good microbes is lost. And the cost of commercial fermented products can be very high as well when you see how easy they are to prepare at home. And you might not know it, but many things that are delicious and common products are fermented. That includes wine, beer, chocolate, tea, cheese, miso, tempeh, yogurt, bread, sauerkraut, kimchi, and even olives actually have been fermented if they are traditionally prepared. So it's a very wide practice across many of our food groups. Once again, I have a couple of safety precautions to take you through that are specific to fermentation. This one pretty similar actually to bottling, but just make sure that all your bottles and things are in great condition and check the lids. Ferments often have acid and salt. So those metal lids that we're looking at are vulnerable to both of those. And in fact, if you leave something like sauerkraut with one of those lids for a long time, you'll find the lids actually do decompose, which is alarming. So you can just make sure that you're not having them sitting there for long periods of time, months and so forth. Yeah, just be aware of that damage if they've got any dent or any scratch in them as well. So again, any moldy or rotten produce, I would not use it for the sauerkraut or for the other techniques that you might want to try with lactofermentation. Trust your nose. If something doesn't smell good to you, then don't eat it. Our nose is a good test, really, of whether something or not has gone wrong. The only thing I'd say is Cairn yeast, and I'll show you a photo in a minute. That's a very benign surface mold that you often get on lactoferments, and you can get it on sourdough bread cultures as well. So we know what that one is. I'll show you a photo. But if it's anything other than that, then just discard and check your method. Now, this one's an important one. Fermentation produces gas, and that can actually explode glass containers if they are tightly sealed. And this is most likely in the initial phase of fermentation, and especially when it's warm and with ingredients that have a higher sugar content. I'm mostly talking about natural sugars there because you probably haven't added any. So sort of sweeter vegetables, things like that, like carrots and beetroots. Yes, we can create more gas from those. So to avoid this hazard, make sure that you don't tightly seal things that are building up pressure. Yeah, there are some tricks there as well if you need to just make sure that you're safe. After a while, you kind of get used to what produces gas and how much, and you can adjust, but just be cautious. And also, we're all a bit different, so try a small amount of a new ferment first. Don't go too over the top. And yeah, also be aware that acidic food, while it may be very healthy for you, it can impact on your dental health. And so you're probably not going to overdo it with the sauerkraut that I'll talk through tonight. But if you did decide to do something like kombucha, for example, or milk kefir, they have a similar pH to like Coca-Cola. So you just need to be careful that you're not overdoing it and damaging your tooth enamel. Also note that ferments, including sauerkraut, things like that, they will contain small amounts of alcohol. And for some people who are avoiding alcohol for health or religious reasons, that might be important information for you to know. All right, so let's get on to basic sauerkraut. This is one I feel like everyone should know because it is so delicious and so easy. And really, when you see how it's done, you'll probably not be motivated to spend money on it ever again because it starts just with simple cabbage. And I'm using a few different types of cabbage here, but you start by slicing it finely and evenly. I have a mandolin in the background on the right-hand side. You certainly don't need one of those. It does do it very fine and very even. I also feel afraid for my fingers whenever I use it, even with a guard. So nothing wrong with just taking it slow, slicing it nice and finely with a knife. I would recommend that you reserve one of the outside leaves. And actually also, it's not written in here, but cut out the core of the cabbage and hang on to that because that can be quite helpful. And I'll show you how in a minute. Yes. Okay, so next, take your sliced cabbage and we want to weigh it and make sure that we're adding at least 2.5% salt. So as an example calculation, if you had 1,000 grams of cabbage, so a kilo of cabbage, you would add 25 grams of salt. Now you read on the internet, you must use sea salt, you must use this and that. Honestly, any salt works, including basic iodized table salt. That's all good. Don't worry if you go over that amount, but just make sure that you're not under. And if you don't have scales, the way that we would check it is to taste some of the brine, which you'll see in the next photo, And the line I was taught is you want it to be pleasantly salty, but not like seawater. Okay, so most of us have accidentally got a mouthful of ocean water at some point at the beach. So not like that, but just pleasantly salty. The easiest for beginners if you weigh it just to get a feel for it, and then you probably may not need to weigh it again. You can just go by eye. All right, so pop the salt in and we just start to gently squeeze and massage the cabbage and salt together until they're well combined. Some people at this point actually pound it. Yes, it does break some of the tissues and it helps the salt to leach more of the brine out, but it also means you get softer, kind of soggier sauerkraut, to be honest, which I tend to prefer mine a little more firm. So yeah, just a strong massage is what I do. And you should start to see the salt drawing out a liquid, as you can see in the photo here. So it creates its own brine or salty liquid. And that's the bit you would taste if you were not weighing. Just make sure it tastes pleasantly salty. Once you get to that stage, you can pack it into your jars. I don't want to go too close to the top here again because it may start to expand a little bit when it ferments. And I got it. Oh, yes, just show you that. So there's plenty of brine in there. And at this point, if you've reserved some of the cabbage outer leaf, you can actually cut it into a circle, pop it on the top of the sauerkraut, and that'll be a bit of a lid that holds it all below the brine. And what that means is you don't have sauerkraut floating to the surface where it can develop some of the calm yeast that I talked about earlier. And then if you've been really clever and you've saved the core of your cabbage, you can put that on top of the cabbage leaf and then put the lid on eventually, and that will actually, hold everything down below the brine. That's the storage, but we'll show you what you do next in the next step. Okay, so when you're fermenting your sauerkraut, you've got two options. If you've just used cabbage and salt and you haven't added anything extra in there, there's no beetroot, there's no apples, nothing fancy that you've thrown in, you can seal the lid tightly and not open it until you intend to eat it. I would leave this at room temperature for about 3 to 7 days, the shorter if it's quite warm, the longer if it's a cooler time of year, and then place it in the fridge. Note that I've said seal the lid tightly there. So the only reason I'm saying that is because we know that with basic cabbage and salt, there just won't be enough pressure to cause an explosion. But you need to be very safe if there's anything else in there. So don't do it for any different combinations. Okay. But that is nice. It's nice and sort of clean and straightforward. For everything else, if you've got a recipe where you've added extra things that might have natural sugars like beetroot, carrot, etc., find a jar that fits inside the sauerkraut jar, fill it up with water and use it as a weight to keep the cabbage submerged. This is going to now ferment quite a bit. It might rise up and bubble over, as you can see in the bottom photo, and there'll be quite a bit of gas that might come out here. So we need it to be an open ferment, as you can see here. I would cover it with a tea towel and put it in a dish to catch any overflow, and again leave it for the same amount of time until the phase starts to slow down, and then you can put on the lid and put it in the fridge and it's not going to continue to bubble away. The image at the top right is just to show you what calm yeast looks like. It's a kind of wrinkled white or beige scum and it forms where any bits of cabbage have floated up to the top of the brine. It's not ideal, but it's also not unsafe. We know what this one is, so you don't need to worry about this one. You can just scrape it off. And next time, see if you can get the cabbage leaf just covering over the top of things to keep all the little bits of cabbage below the surface of the brine. I'm going to say sauerkraut lasts for about a month in the fridge. After that, the quality of it starts to decline. It also continues to get a bit more acid as it goes, and it might get to a point where you no longer enjoy it. But yeah, it's a long storing product. Of course, traditionally they would put things in a very cold cellar rather than needing to refrigerate, but very few of us these days have a cold cellar. So unfortunately, yeah, fridge is best for open sauerkraut. Now, once you've got this basic technique for lacto-fermentation, we can do it with lots of other combinations and actually other types of vegetables as well. So here's a few different types of sauerkraut that I like to make. A favourite for me is red cabbage with grated beetroot and some dill in there, either fresh or dried. Grated carrot, ginger, and turmeric is delicious. You can make a version with cabbage and a bit of seaweed mixed through it. Kimchi is a basic sauerkraut process, but the cabbage has had lots of delicious things added to it, like garlic and ginger, and also often fruit is mixed in and something from the onion family. They also add gochujang, which is a fermented Korean chili paste that is very flavorful, not unlike miso, but with obviously lots of chili. And if you don't want to buy that, and I have seen it in some major shops, by the way, so it is around, but you could also get somewhere close to it with some smoked paprika and miso if you want to wing it. It makes quite a nice alternative, although maybe it would offend Koreans to call it kimchi, I'm not sure. Anyway, kimchi, and you can add those sorts of ingredients to really ramp up the flavour. If you wanted to lacto ferment chunky bits of vegetables, so sliced up carrots and radish and cauliflower and things, it's really the same process, but those sorts of things won't produce enough of their own brine. So we actually have to make a brine and cover them in it. So we would make a 5% brine. There are slightly different percentages for different vegetables, so you could look that up if you wanted to. But a 5% brine is a good rule of thumb. And that would mean 50 grams of salt to a litre of water. And then you would use that to submerge your vegetables and follow the same process to ferment them that we've talked about. Robin has put a very good question in the chat. I may have missed this, but presume we are using sterilised jars here also. Yeah, Robin, so usually for me, they are very, very clean, hot, soapy water. I don't usually sterilise them, but you could certainly do that if you wanted to, and it might mean that they last a little bit longer. But typically for me, just a very clean, freshly washed jar is good enough for this process. We are creating acids here through the lacto-fermentation. I should have said the lacto comes from lactobacillus, so the kind of bacteria that makes your yogurt nice and sour, for example. And we're also not vacuum sealing, so we're not in a low oxygen environment. So here we're not as worried about things like botulism. We've also got a very faulty scenario going on as well in the brine. So there's a lot of other preserving agents. We're not relying on absolute pure sterilisation here for anything. So that's why just a freshly washed jar is good enough. Of course, commercially they would sterilise them, but yeah, it's fine at home. Okay, so I'm coming towards the end of the sorts of things I wanted to share with you. Just a few other notes in here. If you have a loaded grapevine, as I'm lucky enough to have at the moment, I wanted to just mention steam juices because they are extremely useful for producing grape juice and juice products. And this is the equipment you can see on the right-hand side. And I'm still a little bit at a loss to explain how they work, but basically you've got a 3-layered stack of saucepans. In the bottom layer, you'll have some water that's boiling away. In the top layer, you put your grapes, and in the middle layer, juice magically accumulates. So the top is a bit like a colander. It's got a base with holes in it, and yet in the middle it's a catching layer for the juice. And this hose here, it's just folded up at the moment, but this hose is where you can tap off the juice. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be hot enough when it comes off to go straight into the hot pack open kettle method. So I usually have to cool it down and do the cold pack method for long storage, unfortunately. But yeah, it is a beautiful way of producing juice because you don't have to deal with, grape pips flying across the kitchen and, taking grapes off the bunches before you juice them in a kind of traditional household juicer. This one is just very, very easy and straightforward, and just put that on your cooktop like a normal saucepan. So that's a steam juicer for those of you who are interested in making some juice. And that lovely kind of pink juice there is actually our grape juice that we produce every year using this method. And I bottle it in those larger jars when I'm sharing, and then in some of these twin top recycled bottles here for a single serve. Jams. I know I haven't talked about jams tonight, and they are very popular, so I feel a bit bad about that. The reason I chose not to talk about them is because when I've taught people to make jams before, people see the amount of sugar and then decide that they're not going to eat much jam anymore. And that's because jams are about 50% by weight sugar. So it is quite a serious amount of sugar. There are some things about making jams, like using a wide pan, like the one you can see here, and doing it in small batches so that you can make them quickly, which is important so that the chemistry of them works. And also making sure, of course, that your fruit has enough pectin in it, which is the naturally occurring chemical that helps jams to set. This is why people sometimes add fruit that's slightly unripe to jams. And sometimes you may need to add commercial pectin if you're using a fruit that doesn't naturally contain much. Or you could use apple cores and pips in a little muslin tea bag as well. There's a few little things on jams, but chose not to cover those today because mostly bottling and drying and so forth tends to be the most helpful ones if you're going to eat a lot of fruit that you've preserved. Freezing probably doesn't need a lot of mention, just to say that if you are preserving, say, vegetables, many of them are much better if you do a quick blanch in boiling water before you freeze them. And my basic understanding of that is it deactivates some of the enzymes, which if you were not to do that step would really degrade their quality while you're freezing them, and they may not be as appetizing when they come out later. So just if you do want to freeze vegetables, look up and see whether they should be blanched first. Fermenting, we've covered just briefly. Pressure canning, just to reiterate, pressure canning is a different method or similar to the bottling method, the cold pack bottling. However, it uses special equipment similar to a pressure cooker so that you can really sterilize things to a higher degree for safety. And that is something people, again, use for vegetables or meats if you're determined to have them in a bottle. Canning, by the way, is the American or North American term for bottling. So you'll read about canning and then you'll also read about pressure canning. And so hopefully the difference between those is clear now. Okay, so one of the key questions people usually have is, where am I going to get some of this equipment? And I've put up a few suggestions. Some of them I've been to myself, some of them people have told me about over the years. These are the sorts of places where you could buy those replacement lids that we talked about before, and any of the other specialist equipment that you were interested in. If you've, someone is just saying, oh, hello, Sarah. Someone is saying Homemake It has closed. That's very sad to hear, Sarah. I'll take that one out. Costante Imports, I think is definitely still there, and that is a worthwhile day trip, I'll just say, for anyone interested in preserving. Quite incredible. There are some other local places where you might be able to get jars and lids, as well as the usual online places. And finally, as a preserving reference, of course, there are lots of books. I don't really have a favourite, to tell you the truth, but one that I do think is worth having a look at is the US Department of Agriculture Complete Guide to Home Canning. And that is available free online on the website of the National Centre for Home Food Preservation. And yes, it's US based. We actually don't have an equivalent in Australia, to my knowledge. This is an institution that is set up to provide a sort of scientific and technical advice to people preserving food at home. So it's a really good place to start, and it will take you through the science and the detail behind the methods that I've showed you tonight. And so, my friends, I think that is everything that I wanted to show you. So we do have some time for questions, but what I'm going to put up now is just a QR code for some feedback. And if you found tonight helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you just take 60 seconds, tick a few boxes on that form for us, because that critical data is what helps us to improve this program and also literally helps keep it going, so we know it's being used and we know it's helpful for you out there. So at this point, just remind you that mysmartgarden.org.au is there, and all year round, as well as on demand on our website, we've got this sort of workshop to help you grow food at home, grow habitat, shelter your home from extreme weather, and also save water and prevent waste at home in your garden as well. I'm going to send you a link to the recording and some of the resources I've spoken about if you join live. It will also go up on our website within a fortnight or so. And I appreciate all your lovely feedback that's coming through the chat. Thank you so much. If there were any questions that I missed or anything else you'd like to ask me before we finish up tonight, please pop it back in the bottom of the chat now so I don't have to scroll through and try and find it. And I'm going to stop the recording and then I will hang on for any further questions that you might have.